I'm Sidony O'Neill. I'm a research-based artist living and working in Portland, Oregon. The research is so big and so exciting, and there are a zillion questions that I can not see the end of, and that's really exciting. Like, if something is resolved, or if I already know the answer, like if I wake up and know the answer, like I'll never want to touch it. Like, how many works already exist fully done in my mind, but the ones that I'm like, I don't even know where to begin, that's when I go to the studio. That's what keeps me in the studio. My work proceeds from the research that I'm engaged in, and then after that someone will say, well, what's your research about? And then I get to say like math or computing or histories of philosophies of mathematics, furniture making histories, architecture histories. And then eventually it'll get to like, okay, but what comes out of the studio? And then that's when I'm like, can I interest you in a gallery of, different works that I've created in recent years? I think a lot of my research is anchored by an interest in synthesis and like the ways that, complex systems get built from like tiny local interfaces. For instance, like I spent the last year doing pretty focused research around constructivism, which is like an artistic kind of like a movement in art history that is pretty sort of transnational, supranational, kind of in the early 19th century, and then also mathematic constructivism, which actually has like shares a lot of resonances and kind of makes its way through to contemporary or modernist mathematics and contemporary math in the 80s, which sort of allowed for a lot of computing like to be streamlined and also just impacted a lot of like the history of recent histories of computer science. And so I think like finding spaces where those histories can be seen as what they are, sort of this synthetic product of interface, has made for a lot of kind of rich, like, I don't know, objects in my studio. Some of the outputs in my studio are sculptural, so I'm working with materials a lot and thinking about material properties. But then some of the methods are also like, how do I take, an interest in these more kind of abstract or sort of non-material, non-sort of formed relationships, and then bring them into things. And so, yeah, for a while I might be interested in like a specific furniture form as the way to like kind of think through a specific historical interface, or there's a curvature, there's a very specific kind of curvature that exists in a furniture form that wouldn't have existed or been as well defined if like, the history of calculus didn't include these kind of moments. And so I work there. I work with like different like, tons of different tools, but I think with the kind of overarching feeling that like systems are kind of the product of interface, and like keeping that kind of energy in the studio can also produce like objects and drafts and things that are the product of interface. And I think that's, pretty resonant with my experience in the world. In October, I have a show at Princeton that is the kind of, just like a really amazing invitation to like cap the research I've been doing there for the last year as a Hodder Fellow. And that presentation will be one of the kind of largest and I would say like most specific conversations that I've had in the work around histories of mathematics, proofs, and these sort of structures that I think are really important to my thinking about interface. Even with Princeton, what's really exciting is like having been able to connect with mathematicians, having been able to connect with the Institute for Advanced Study, even in my own kind of like, squirrely ways, like engaging in research and being able to present work that then can be in dialogue with like some of these conversations where I think artists are not always like invited to be in the room in the first place. And so maybe like what's next, or what I like am trying to like usher in, is more of that, more of like, I don't even like the word interdisciplinary or whatever, but like, synthetic ways of like being, The studio practice is about the way stuff gets made in the studio, but it's because there are a mix of inheritances or like influences in the work, and some of those influences are math objects and computer objects, and some of them are historical and sort of physical or architectural objects, and yeah, for those to live in the same work, or for those sort of thrusts to find place in the same work, or to fight for place in the same work, I think that's like the practice, that's how things show up. With hash table for tensors like us, a hash table is a data structure. It's not like a dictionary maybe, or it's like a searchable architecture. And thinking about these types of like furniture histories, these types of like functional object histories as searchable data structures, or as actionable data structures, right, that encode and that hold kind of histories, like thinking of like humans as tensors, right? A tensor, the title has this word tensor in it, and a tensor is, a kind of math object that is actually heavily used in machine learning. It's really robust and able to handle a lot of data, and maybe for that reason, computer scientists use it to describe complex objects. The sculpture itself is sort of functioning like this data structure, and to like, image them or present them in this way that slips between, like it's hard to tell that it is a structure that is inherited from this hash table. Another work, Lunid, the nest, which makes, use of like a gridded substrate and like a 3D printed metal form. And, it's like, it's a workspace. It like looks a lot like a workspace that you might find in like, I don't know, like Blender or something. But this form is like really, none of the work is screen based, and so you have this like physical interaction with a grid, and the grid has all of these kind of historical meanings, and actually the meaning of a grid changes depending on where you are and who you're talking to. Engaging the grid brings a lot to bear on both, the physical or the built environment, and also on like digital or non or screen-based, experiences. And like that's the type of, I guess, like method or translation or synthesis of structure that I'm interested in like chasing after in the studio. I have had a very long-standing collaboration with artist Keon Gaskin. We have a project called Dead Thoroughbred, and it lives somewhere between sound and movement, performance, and just like intervention. And it's been such a privilege to travel and tour the work over the years. Sometimes I say that the project is an excuse to hang out with my best friend, but it's really been a really sort of generative space outside of like my like solo studio practice. And the relationship as practitioners that Kian and I have has been like incredibly important to me over the years. Another collaborative project that I have is with artist Bohosi Sekukuni, and it's called Infant. It's a design firm that the two of us have conceived of as a way to think about multiples and functional objects from our respective positions as practitioners in visual arts. The thought I just had that came into my mind was just like, there's so much work to be done and there's not enough time. But that's the feeling. Yeah, the feeling that I have is that there is quite a bit of work ahead of me in the like, yeah, in the world of the work, in the world that I have like, you know, sort of set up for myself in the practice. I can see like, you know, that there's quite a bit of work to get done, and I'm just like every day I wake up and figure out what is the next thing, you know, like what's the next step.